Preheat the mandrel as you normally would. Then make a cylinder that is about 1 inch long. This will be the face and neck. Leave space on the mandrel to add the hat, which will probably be about 1 inch long. Don't worry about perfection or applying the glass perfectly as long as you get the glass on without any bubbles. We will be adding a lot of glass as we go. Even out the surface of the glass and then add a little extra glass to one end that will be used for the head. I will be using a razor blade tool to make a little mark to separate the neck from the head. Any sharp tool will work, and this mark is just for reference only. It will ultimately be melted smooth. Keep the bead warm, reheating as needed, like you would with any bead. Using 2mm black stringer, add a ring around the base of the neck. Any black will work as long as it's not metallic. It is easier for me to read the heat in the black than it is in the pea green. I preheat the face of the bead and then add a fine black stringer that I'm going to use for the mouth. I heat the stringer slightly as I apply it, and when I've added as much glass as I want, I stop the heating, I bend the glass back, I blow on it, and snap it off cleanly. Now it's time to shape the mouth. I heat the stringer and try not to heat the base glass. While the stringer is soft, I use a sharp tool to move the stringer in the direction that I want. I do this just a little bit at a time, trying to move just the stringer and not the base glass. The filming might be a little misleading because it appears that I am putting the entire face of the bead into the flame, when in actuality I'm working in the radiant heat underneath the flame. The majority of the heating and reheating that goes on to keep the bead from cracking has been removed from the video for the sake of time. I did want to mention that it can be pretty challenging to keep the entire bead warm without melting small components. So what I do is I heat the bead more frequently but add less heat each time. This is especially important when the components are still raised. When I am done shaping the mouth, I will take the black stringer and add 2 small dots for the eyes. I need to make sure that there's room to put the green stringer in for the nose between the mouth and the eyes. So once I put the eyes on, I check to make sure that that room is there, and if not, I use a razor blade tool to adjust the location of the dots. Once I am happy with the location, I melt the dots a little bit more and press them down to make sure that they are adhered to the bead. These are just marker dots, and I don't worry if they get melted in completely. Now I start laying down the foundation for the witch's hair. I am using a red rod because it is similar to the color that I will be using for glass for the textured hair later on. Basically, I'm using the red for background, for reference, and to build volume. Later, I will be adding more volume with the case stringer that I made for textured hair. I can add more volume then, but it is easier and less time consuming to do it now. I take care to make sure that no pea green shows through, but in the event that it does, it's not really a big deal because I can cover it up later on when I add texture. I don't need to add any red to the top of the bead because that is where I'm going to be placing the hat later on. When I am done adding all the red glass, I melt it smooth. Now it is time to add a foundation dot for the nose. I add just a little bit of glass with the pea green stringer, and I melt it in just enough so that there are no undercuts. I will be adding more glass for the nose later on. At this point, I haven't added any detail to the nose or the eyes because they wouldn't survive the additional heat that I'll be adding later on. So I leave all details to the very end. Now I'm going to start adding texture to the hair. I made a case stringer earlier. It's just a red-orange with transparent red over it. And it gives a little more distinction between hair color than if I was just going to use the plain orange. I dot it on and streak it on randomly, mainly just to add volume. I am also starting to add texture so I don't melt it in all the way. At this point I use white stringer and add a couple dots to the eyes. I'm more or less just checking to see what it looks like at this point. I'm not really sure if I want to melt the white down and use it simply as a background or leave the white raised as much as possible and even add more white to it later on. I really don't know what I'm doing right at this point. I'm just thinking. Now it's time to start the hat. I could have started the hat earlier before I added the hair, but it doesn't really matter one way or the other. I don't even need to be really concerned about how the glass goes on the mandrel as long as I make sure that there's no bubbles. I'm using a stringer to add black glass for the top of the hat in this video, but sometimes I use a rod and sometimes I use the shorts that are laying around or whatever. So right now I'm going to remove those white dots that I put on. I'm not really sure why I did that, but apparently I felt that there was too much volume building up and wanted to add something different than the white at this point. So I just heat the white up and pull it off with the cooler black stringer until all the white is gone. I start adding more glass for the top of the hat, and I kind of decide as I go about whether or not I want a fatter or thinner hat or a taller or shorter hat. It all depends on how it relates to the face and what kind of character I want to give the particular witch that I'm doing. This is why I like to have my mandrels dipped really long so that when I get to this point, I don't have to stress out about how much further I have to work to make the hat as tall as I want it to be. Here I am working with stringer because I'm starting to do the rim of the hat. It's a lot easier for me to melt each wrap in with stringer than if I would have applied it with the rod. I have a little dental spatula that helps me a lot, that you can see in this video. I switched to a rod because I'm going to be adding more glass to the top of the hat, and I'm going to need quite a bit of glass to do it. So that is why I'm using a rod at this point. I apply the glass roughly because I know I'm going to have a lot more changes going on as the bead progresses. My main concern is that I don't have any bubbles. I have found that as I add the glass, if I wrap it on with space between the wraps, I'm less likely to get any bubbles in what I'm doing. When I do the hat, I do a lot of heating and cooling and heating and cooling, mostly thinking and shaping and thinking and shaping until I'm happy with what I see and where I am before I take the next step. And the next step is to work on the rim a little bit more. So here I am with the stringer again, adding more wraps. I'm really careful about melting each wrap in with the previous wrap so that nothing pops off when it starts to cool down. I use my little dental tool a lot, and I heat and reheat a lot. Every wrap requires reheating. I make sure that each wrap is definitely fused to the previous one, but I don't melt it completely smooth because I kind of like the marks that are left in between each wrap. It gives kind of texture to the hat that I'm making. It looks nice melted in smooth as well, but that gives a whole different character to the witch's hat. One option that is kind of fun is to add a twisty to the hat for a hat band. I apply the twisty here starting in the back. My plan is to go all the way around and then later on place a little knot at the connecting point with maybe some tails that go off the edge of the hat. When I get all the way around the rim of the hat, I clip off the stringer with my tile nippers, and then I reheat. I heat the stringer a little bit more from the back of the stringer instead of starting at the tip of the stringer because I don't want it to retract back upon itself when it gets warm. I begin to add more glass to the top of the hat now that the stringer has been put into place. If I was going to do this witch again, I probably wouldn't use the stringer that I chose this time. I used a Fetre Halloween orange and regular transparent black, and I just wasn't really happy with how soft the Halloween orange was, and it wasn't quite as bright as I had hoped. I continue to add wraps to the rim of the hat. I will be heating the hat and the rest of the head frequently at this point, so I thought this would be a good time to start adding the case stringer and building even more volume to the hair. And this is a good time to continue to build out on the rim of the witch's hat. Now that I've built out the rim a little bit more, I decide to start building up the height of the peak of the witch's hat and adding a little bit to what will ultimately become the witch's collar. Before I add more glass to the hat, I need to make the crescent moon design. I find a flat spot on the top of the hat. If I don't have one, I will make one, where I add a single dot of white glass. I make sure that everything is warm, especially the rim of the hat. I add a little bit more glass to the edge of the collar. Then I add more glass to the rim of the hat. Now it is time to change my full moon into a crescent moon. To do this, I mask off some of the white with a small dot of black. I should have added a smaller dot and pushed it further into the crescent moon, but I'll fix that in a little bit. I add dots with the Effetre Pastel Regular White. I add one to each eye, and then I'm distracted for a moment and run right into the rim of my hat. It almost looks like I do it on purpose. I could probably have removed the dot right away by popping it off, but I wanted to give a couple rounds of heat to the bead before I started messing with it. So I pick up my needle nose pliers, and clearly those aren't the best tool to use for this, so I switch out to the very pointed tweezers, which work really well. And off goes that unwanted dot. Now I add more white to the eyes to give them a little more volume. I want the eyes to protrude a little bit because I think it will look more witch-like. I tap down the eyes a bit to prepare for the next dot that I'm going to be placing on them. I'm going to be using yellow ochre, and I've pulled a tiny bit of stringer off the end of the rod rather than pull a really long stringer and use that. And that way I'll be saving a little bit of glass. I want the white and the black to show, so I only make teeny tiny dots of the yellow ochre. I melt the dots so that they're fused together, but in a way that the eyes are still raised. There is still more to be done to the eyes, but I won't be doing that until later. Now I use pea green stringer to start building out the nose. I add one dot at a time, building out slowly and making sure that each dot is fused to the previous dot. I don't really worry about shape because I will be changing the shape of the nose later on when I get closer to finishing the bead. Now I'm going to take a black and pea green twisty and add it to the witch's collar. I like this twisty a lot better than the one with the Halloween orange and black. It is stiffer and the color is crisper. I wrap it around slowly, and then I let the weight of the end of the stringer drop down to help seal the ends. I nip it off with my tile nipper and use my tweezers to finish it off. Right about now I start getting really nervous. I'm really worried about the rim of the hat or any part of the bead cracking. I make sure that I heat the bead completely after every single time that I make a change to the bead. I continue to add glass to the rim of the hat until I'm happy with the size. As the hat gets bigger, it takes longer and longer to put on each wrap of glass. So it's really important that I reheat the entire bead each time I make it all the way around. I make sure that each wrap is completely fused into the previous wrap, and I found that preheated mini mashers are really helpful when the rim of the hat gets to be this large. Now I start to add character to the hat. I melt the back of the rim of the hat and press it down into the bead with the graphite marvering paddle. I do this a little bit at a time. I heat and press and heat and press, and meanwhile heating the entire bead between each change. I continue to do this until the back of the hat is the shape that I want. This is a good time to adjust the hat band as well. I am going to apply a knot in the place that the two ends of the hat band meet, and then I'm going to draw a tail of the hat band down over the edge of the rim of the hat. I drop the tail over the rim of the hat and clip it off with my tile nippers. I'll be tweezing off the very tip with a pair of tweezers. I use my little dental tool to press down on the knot, and probably shouldn't have done that at that point. It was still very soft and pretty much destroyed any kind of detail that I had planned for it there. I could have gone back in and fixed it, but I never did. I start to shape the collar, pushing it up towards the face. I'm at the point of the bead where very little heat will be hitting the face, so I add the tiny details now. I add tiny black dots with tiny stringer for the pupils of the eyes, and I build out the nose with pea green stringer. Again, I only do a little bit at a time, making sure everything is fused as I go. As it turns out, I was so focused on doing the nose correctly that I didn't reheat in between each wrap. And guess what happened? No worries, I decide to go back in and do repairs. I add another wrap of the black stringer to the collar. I make sure everything is warm. I pay particular attention to the collar, making sure that there were no additional cracks closer to the mandrel, and I make sure that everything is fused really well. I add a new twisty to the collar. This time I removed the end with my needle nose pliers rather than the nippers because I want to pull down on the end a little bit so that it leaves a really pointed tip on the twisty and I can blend it in more easily. I use my handy dandy preheated mini mashers to make sure that the twisty is adhered really well to the previous wrap. Keeping everything warm. I shape the collar again. If I wanted to make any changes to the rim of the hat, I would do it now. I don't need to make any changes, so before I flame anneal the bead and place it in the kiln, I add that final touch, the black wart that every good witch should have.